Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to come here and talk with you. Yeah, I'd like to spend a few minutes on this question that probably hasn't gotten a whole lot of attention in the density and densification debate, but that I think is an important one to consider, which is the question of, does increasing urban density, does increasing urban density increase urban disaster risk? And by disaster risk here, I'm referring to everything from earthquakes to major power outages to terrorism events and the whole range, right? So does increasing urban density mean increasing urban disaster risk? I think if, maybe our instinctive reaction might be, well, yeah, sure, when you have more people at risk, then disaster risk goes up, right? But of course, it's not that simple. And I'd like to touch on some of the complexities in this in the next few minutes. Basically, there are a few points that I want to deliver. The first is that, yes, density has some implications and challenges for emergency management and disaster management. These can be planned for. And second, that density does have an effect on disaster risk, but it's only one of many factors, and probably not the most important one at that. And third, that there, maybe surprisingly, there are some indirect benefits of density for disaster risk that we should keep in mind as well. So let me talk a little bit about challenges for disaster management. Certainly, I think if we think about disasters that we've all seen, or hopefully not, been in, past disasters, we know that in the emergency response phase, having higher concentrations of people, more density, does pose some particular challenges for emergency management, such as perhaps a heightened risk of fire following earthquake, or difficulties in search and rescue when you have high concentrations of people in an area, challenges for debris clearance when you have debris on the streets, difficulties of access to transport networks, traffic congestion. We've seen examples of all of these in recent disasters. Even in events such as major power outages, we know that when you have high-rise buildings, there are particular vulnerabilities of those to power outages, such as the dependence on elevators, for one, and the dependence of water systems within high-rises on power and so forth. All these sorts of infrastructure interdependencies that kind of get magnified when you have high concentrations of people in high-rise buildings. Those are just a few of the examples of challenges in the emergency response. I think there are also some challenges that come up when you get to the disaster recovery phase, and we're seeing, for example, some of this in Christchurch, New Zealand after the earthquake, where you have, just to give one example, if you have to demolish a high-rise building, that gets a little more complicated when you're in a high population density kind of setting. So those are some of the challenges that come up in disaster management. These are challenges that I think should be acknowledged and should be planned for, but are not insurmountable. And I just want to be clear here that this is not an argument against density. And the reason I say that is because I think density does have an effect on disaster risk, but it's just one of many factors that influence risk. And I think that may become a little bit clearer if I give you an example. So let me do that next. Okay. So the example I'm going to give you comes from some research that we recently completed on modeling potential earthquake losses in Greater Vancouver, Metro Vancouver. And this is looking over decades of time during which the urban area has changed quite dramatically and quite rapidly. And we were interested in the question of, well, how do these urban changes affect disaster risk? So what we did was we modeled a particular earthquake scenario. This is one earthquake. It's a magnitude 7.3 in the Georgia Strait. And we modeled it as what if it had happened in 1971? What if it had happened in 2006? What if it were to happen in 2041? How would disaster losses differ due to changes in the urban area? So as we know, sorry, it's at the bottom here. As we know, population has increased dramatically over this period. So between 1971 and 2006, population pretty much doubled, and going out to 2041, we're anticipating adding another 1 million plus people in this region. So density, of course, is increasing concomitantly in this period. And in terms of the modeling here, the computer modeling for disaster losses, for future growth, we took the 1 million plus people and we had several scenarios as to where these people might go. So the map on the top there shows compact growth. It's one example of compact growth. So we put all the 1 million plus people in a few areas. The second map is putting in a sprawl growth kind of scenario, all people in other areas, and there are a few other scenarios that we modeled basically as possibilities for the future. And this is one slice of the results from our modeling effort for earthquake losses. So this is population in significantly damaged buildings. And you can see that there's an increase from about 30,000 odd to 50,000 odd between 1971 and 2006 for the same earthquake event. But if you project that out into the future, of course, it depends upon what land use and development scenario you're looking at, but that could be anywhere from a slight increase to a decrease, right? So without getting into the details here, I only have one point to make from this, and that is that density does influence disaster risk, but it is by far, in a way, not the only factor. There are many other factors coming into here. So it's not just how many people and where they are and how concentrated they are, but also what kind of buildings they're in, the building codes that those structures are subject to, and all these other kinds of effects as well. So changes in other aspects of development patterns also make a big difference. So we shouldn't make too much of the results here. I just wanted to mention, of course, that this is for one particular earthquake. Out of many that could occur, earthquakes just one out of many hazards that we're at risk from, and that there are also other factors that are harder to quantify. So I'm going to end with a comment here that so far pretty much what I've said is that, if you increase density, there is the possibility, depending upon how well you plan, there's a possibility that this may increase physical risk in disasters. I think the other side of this that's really important to remember is that there are indirect benefits of density as well, potentially. So to the extent that increased density, when done well, increases community well-being, this too has an effect on disaster resilience, or the capacity of communities to withstand disaster risk and to recover rapidly from disasters. So for example, aspects of community well-being, what do I mean by that? Aspects of community well-being such as increased economic vitality, increased neighborhood cohesion, improved population health through more walkable cities, improved transportation redundancy, all these aspects of community well-being have been mentioned in the disaster research area as factors that contribute to disaster resiliency of communities. So the ability, again, of communities to withstand and recover rapidly from disasters. So I think we need to keep both of those aspects in mind, and that's the message that I want to leave you with. Thank you very much.